Hello everyone, welcome back to Actual English. I'm Jennifer Clyde. It's time for lesson 238 and today's topic is airport security. So I'm sure those of you that have flown to all different places around the world, especially after 9/11, know that airport security is very strict. There are what's called pat-downs. Now passengers, in some cases they are chosen randomly, but the officials there or the officers, security officers, they choose passengers for pat-downs that need additional checkups. So additional checking apart from or in addition to the airport or the regular airport security checks. Pat-downs can be very inconvenient, and a lot of people complain about feeling very uncomfortable because usually during pat-downs what we do is we have the officers patting down their hands over our clothing, but it feels very uncomfortable and some people even feel invaded. So it is an inconvenience, but it's something that we cannot avoid when we fly to foreign countries. So anyhow, we'll talk about pat-downs in more detail in today's Actual Talk conversation, as well as the general topic, airport security. Here we go.
Hey Peter, what do you think about the increased airport security that's going on these days? Good thing, bad thing?
First, after 9/11, before that it was pretty lax, I guess, comparatively speaking. You could take anything you want on planes, like litre bottles of water and whatnot, and then suddenly it all changed. But I found these days, again, they're starting to loosen the checks they put in place. Like you can take a certain number of milliliter bottles on with you and things like that.
It's interesting that you mentioned water. We don't normally think of water as dangerous,
Sure.
but water can be dangerous. It's just amazing what can be dangerous now compared to when I was younger. I'm a little bit older than you, but I was actually on a flight when 9/11 occurred.
You were on a flight when it occurred?
Yes, I was.
Wow.
And I had no idea. Nobody did. I was coming back from Korea to Canada. And I went in, we landed in America, and it was unbelievable. The way that the security was being handled, I'd never seen anything like it. And our country is used to be, I'm Canadian, as you know, very open. Like you could just drive over the border, no ID, and everything changed from that day. And it became so extreme, I guess.
So did you have to do any pat-downs or walk through x-ray machines when you got
absolutely.
to the flight?
I had my luggage torn apart, not put back together again. People were just trusting no one. They were terrified. And from that day on, of course, protocol was put into place. It's just never been the same.
Sure.
I think it got a bit too extreme, actually.
Yeah, I went to LA last year and I had to wait in a queue for 50 minutes. And I realised why when I got there, because they pat you down, they put you through this 3D scanning machine, and it's really thorough. I guess at the end of the day, it's better safe than sorry, but convenience needs to play some kind of part.
One thing I'll never forget was buying a wonderful bottle of lotion that I had to throw away.
Oh.
So in some cases, I guess it's for the better, but balance is the magic word.
Sure.
That was an interesting conversation between Peter and Kelly. Of course, they were talking about airport security. Kelly has even mentioned that she was flying from Korea to Canada when 9/11 happened or occurred. Wow, must have been very scary, especially not knowing what happened and arriving in her home country and having all these officers, security officers, checking everyone and feeling that the airport security is so strict all of a sudden could have been a huge surprise. Anyhow, let's take a look at the Actual Talk conversation. Here we have Kelly beginning by saying, Peter, what do you think about the increased airport security that's going on these days? And then she asks, good thing or bad thing? But here, let's take a look at the word increased here. Increase. Almost automatically, if you see the word or hear the word increase, you may think, more of something, an increased amount or number of something. But here we're talking about how airport security has become a lot stricter, okay? Strict So it's really, really heavy. Airport security is heavy. It's increased. So she says, is it a good thing or a bad thing? What's your opinion? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Well, Peter says after 9/11, yeah, meaning I think it's a good thing after 9/11. So he says, yeah, but before that, it was pretty lax. Comparatively speaking, he says. So let's take a look. First of all, we have after 9/11, it was, well, good. But before that, it was pretty lax. We're talking about airport security. But he's saying before that, airport security was pretty lax. Lax means that it is not strict. It's not restricted. It's not strict. If it's difficult for you to remember the meaning of this word, think of the word to relax. Okay, relax. Loosen things up to make things more flexible, right? So lax could also mean that it is relaxed. It's not strict. So he's saying before the 9/11 incident, before it occurred, it was pretty lax. It wasn't very strict. And then he says, comparatively speaking. Now this is one of our patterns we'll be practicing today, but when would you use comparatively speaking? Compare, look at the word comparatively comes from the word to compare. Now this is used especially when you're talking about two things. Only those two things, and you're kind of making a comparison. So here we're talking about before the incident and after the incident. So you could say, well, before and after, comparatively speaking. Okay, you're comparing the two. Moving on, Kelly says, oh, 9/11. Peter says, you could take anything you want on planes. Now, he is talking about before, right? You could take anything you want on planes, such as, or like, liter bottles of water and whatnot. Okay? Liter bottles of water. We're talking about bottled water. Not those huge ones, but just liter bottled. Oh, I guess a liter bottle is pretty big. So he's talking about these huge bottles of water, how people were allowed to take them on planes when they were traveling, okay? Liter is spelled in American English, L-I-T-E-R, as you see, but in British English, they prefer to spell it L-I-T-R-E, but it's pronounced exactly the same way, liter, okay? And then what happened? And then suddenly, it all changed. It all changed. Everything changed. But I've found these days, again, they're starting to loosen the checks they put in place. So we're talking about switching from A, okay, it's not strict, it's pretty lax or relaxed, and then it suddenly became very strict. And then he says, but I found these days, again, they're starting to loosen the checks they put in place. Loosen means what? Also, to make less tight. We're talking about strictness. So he's saying, well, it's somehow become less strict, not as strict as before. You can take a certain number of 100 milliliter bottles with you, okay? So you can take a certain number of, meaning several 100 milliliter bottles with you. So we're talking about the small changes that were made after the 9/11 incident. Kelly says, it's interesting that you mention water. It's interesting that you bring up the topic of water. We don't normally think of water as dangerous. That's right. Does anyone think of water as dangerous? Does water equal dangerous? That's what she's saying. Nobody ever thought that water equaled dangerous. So that's what she's saying. And then, of course, Peter agrees. He says, yeah, that's true, for sure. Absolutely. But water can be dangerous, she says. Yes, it can be dangerous. It's just amazing what can be dangerous now. That's true. It's amazing. We have no idea what can be dangerous. I was actually on a flight when 9/11 occurred. So she was on a flight. Meaning what? If you say that you were on a flight, it means that you were on a plane traveling somewhere. So she says that when 9/11 occurred, at that time, she was actually on a plane. She was on a flight. So Peter says, you were on a flight when it occurred? Wow, he's surprised. Here, she tells us the story. She says, I had no idea. Nobody did. I was coming back from Korea to Canada. So she was going to Canada from Korea, and it was unbelievable. What was unbelievable? She explains. The way the security was being handled. The way it was being managed, okay? The way they were handling security, in other words. She's talking about how security, airport security, was unbelievable for her at that moment. And our countries used to be, I'm Canadian, as you know, very open. So she's talking about how, let's say, the US or the UK or even Canada, they were pretty open, meaning they were pretty accepting. They were not very strict. So she's talking about, once more, how things suddenly changed since 9/11. Moving on, she says, you could just drive over the border. This is before everything became so strict. You could drive over the border. Border meaning what? A line between two countries. It can also be between two regions, okay? Often if we say the border, T-H-E, border, I crossed the border, end of the conversation or end of the sentence, it usually means the borderline between Mexico and the US. But here, she's basically saying just a border, which could be in any country, a line that separates two places. Well, with no ID, and everything changed from that day, and it became so extreme. She's talking about how airport security or security overall became very extreme. So, did you have to do any pat-downs or walk through X-ray machines when you got off the flight? Let's take a look at Peter's question. So he's asking, so did you have to do any pat-downs or did you have to undergo any pat-downs? Did they do any pat-downs? Would be correct because we have these airport security officers that actually do the pat-downs. You don't do it yourself, not the passengers, but they do. But he's asking her about her experience. Pat-down, this is what I talked about in the beginning of our lesson. So what is a pat-down? Let's say, for example, you go through security at the airport and you have to walk through something very similar to an X-ray machine. They scan your body, right? Or even they scan your bags as you put them on some kind of conveyor belt to go through a machine. But a pat-down usually happens when these officers think they must check you one more time. So they may ask you, could you step over to the side, please? And then they pat you down, meaning they do a pat down. They put their hands over your body, of course, over your clothing, to check to see if you have any weapons or illegal items with you. If you're carrying anything with you that you shouldn't be carrying, so that is a pat down. So that's what he asks, and what did Kelly say? She said, oh, absolutely, yes, she did have to experience it or go through it. She says, I had my luggage torn apart. Wow, okay. I had my luggage torn apart. Luggage, as we all know, we're talking about carry-on baggage, we're talking about suitcases or trunks, baggage or bags. They're all called luggage, but keep in mind, baggage and luggage, they're used in the singular form. You never add an S, so you never say luggages, or you never say baggages, always luggage, baggage, okay? But what did they do? They tore her luggage apart. My luggage was torn apart. They opened everything, divided everything, threw everything out. They made a mess. So she says, not put back together again. So they threw everything out of her luggage and left it that way. People were terrified, and from that day on, since that day, protocol was put into place. It's just never been the same. Protocol, I'm sure you've heard about this word or heard of this word several times. A protocol is basically a set rule or a system of rules that should be followed. So we're talking about just rules, simply put. Okay, rules that need to be followed. So since then, protocol was put into place. There were rules that people had to follow. And she says it has just never been the same. What has never been the same? We're talking about traveling, okay? Modern traveling, of course, it's not the way it used to be. It's a lot stricter right now, okay? Much more. So Peter says, yeah, I went to LA last year and I had to wait in a queue for 50 minutes. Remember what queue is? We're talking about line. So he's saying I had to stand in a queue for 50 minutes. I had to stand in a line for 50 minutes. And I realized why when I got there. He says, because they pat you down, okay? A pat down, pat you down. And they put you through this 3D scanning machine. They do. Your bags do go through a scanning machine, and they could possibly even put people through scanning machines. Search it on the internet. You'll find these very interesting photographs of bags being scanned. It's like they're being x-rayed so you can see what's inside. They may even scan you, or you may have to go through a 3D scanning machine as well. And it's really thorough, okay? We're talking about how everything is done in much detail, okay? I guess at the end of the day, it's better safe than sorry. That's right. It's better to be safe than sorry, but convenience needs to play some kind of part. Meaning, of course, safety is the most important. It's better safe than sorry, meaning it's better to be safe and to do things to be safe rather than waiting until things happen and then regretting it in the end. That's what better safe than sorry means. And convenience needs to play some kind of part. Basically, he's saying that there needs to be some sort of convenience. There needs to be convenience to some extent. Okay? All right, that was an interesting conversation, so let's take a listen to it one more time.
Hey Peter, what do you think about the increased airport security that's going on these days? Good thing, bad thing?
First, after 9/11, before that it was pretty lax, I guess, comparatively speaking. You could take anything you want on planes, like litre bottles of water and whatnot, and then suddenly it all changed. But I found these days, again, they're starting to loosen the checks they put in place. Like you can take a certain number of 100 milliliter bottles on with you and things like that.
It's interesting that you mentioned water. We don't normally think of water as dangerous.
Sure.
But water can be dangerous. It's just amazing what can be dangerous now compared to when I was younger. I'm a little bit older than you, but I was actually on a flight when 9/11 occurred.
You were on a flight when it occurred?
Yes, I was.
Wow.
And I had no idea. Nobody did. I was coming back from Korea to Canada. And I went in, we landed in America, and it was unbelievable. The way that the security was being handled, I'd never seen anything like it. And our countries used to be, I'm Canadian, as you know, very open. Like you could just drive over the border, no ID, and everything changed from that day. And it became so extreme, I guess.
So did you have to do any pat downs or walk through x-ray machines when you got to the flight?
I had my luggage torn apart, not put back together again. People were just trusting no one. They were terrified. And from that day on, of course, protocol was put into place. It's just never been the same.
Sure.
I think it got a bit too extreme, actually.
Yeah, I went to LA last year and I had to wait in a queue for 50 minutes. And I realised why when I got there, because they pat you down, they put you through this 3D scanning machine, and it's really thorough. I guess at the end of the day, it's better safe than sorry, but convenience needs to play some kind of part.
One thing I'll never forget was buying a wonderful bottle of lotion that I had to throw away. So in some cases, I guess it's for the better, but balance is the magic word.
Sure.
Welcome back, everyone. It's time for actual expressions. Let's take you straight into it. First of all, we have lax. Lax. It's very simple and easy to pronounce. Lax, as you see. And I told you, if you don't remember the meaning of this word, think about the word relax. Okay? Lenient. indifferent, or even careless. These are a few synonyms for lax. It means not tense, not strict or severe. What about loosen? Loosen also means relax or to ease things. Things are loosened up here, okay? Or airport security needs to be loosened. We're saying that it needs to be a bit relaxed. It needs to be eased a bit, okay? Moving on to border. Border, also called frontier line, edge, or most commonly I would say borderline. We're talking about a line that separates two regions or towns or cities or especially countries. Moving on to luggage. Let's practice how to pronounce this. Luggage, luggage. Told you never add an S, never say luggages. Luggage basically means suitcase, trunk, or baggage as well. What about protocol? Okay, let's check out the pronunciation. Protocol, protocol. Agreement, custom, or obligation. Agreement or custom would be the closest synonym, but protocol is basically a set or system of rules that need to be followed. Okay, let's move on to today's patterns then. Comparatively speaking is something you would use when you're talking about just two things in context. You're comparing those two things. So let's take a look. Comparatively speaking, I think his sister is nicer than his brother. So comparatively speaking, you're saying, comparing these two, comparing his sister and his brother, I think so-and-so is nicer. In this case, I think his sister is nicer than his brother. You're making a comparison between two things. Here we go. Pat down, okay? Pat down, listen carefully, pat down. Stress goes on the first syllable, okay? Pat down. So what is a pat down? Basically checking people for illegal items such as equipment, right? We're talking about that additional checkup. The metal detector was triggered. It went off, bling, 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 and I had to undergo a pat down. A metal detector is what? A detector or a machine that detects metal. So if you're wearing some sort of metal and you go through this metal detector, well, it will set off an alarm. So in that case, you may have to undergo a pat down. Okay, let's check out one more. Tear something apart. Just imagine tearing things apart, okay? Our tent was torn apart by the wind. Our tent was torn apart by the wind. Okay, you are destroying something. You can also say the wind tore our tent apart. So there are several ways of saying this, but when you want to say that something was destroyed or left a mess, as Callie did, she said that they tore her suitcase apart. You can talk about tear something apart. That about does it for today's actual expressions, everyone. Practice them more on your own.
Going through airport security can be a huge pain in the neck. It can be very time-consuming and even very annoying, especially if you're stuck behind someone who's not very well prepared. When I go through airport security, I like to make sure that there are no liquids or any banned items in my carry-on baggage. I like to wear shoes that are easy to take on and off, and I wear a minimal amount of jewelry so that I don't set off any kind of metal detectors. I've never personally had any really big problems with airport security. When I first came to Korea from California, they did ask me to go through a full body scanner for some unknown reason. I wasn't really thrilled about it. I was a little upset and it was a little uncomfortable. I know a lot of people have had difficulties with the way they get treated at airport security. So while I don't always agree with their methods, overall I think it's better to be safe than sorry.
Are you ready for actual story, everyone? Okay, let's take a look. We had Alexis helping us out. She's given us detailed information about what she does when going through airport security. She mentioned that going through airport security can be a huge pain in the neck, which means it's really annoying. It can be a nuisance. It can be troublesome. Very difficult in certain situations. It can be very time consuming, meaning it can take up a lot of time. It can waste time, especially if you're stuck behind someone who is not well prepared. So if somebody in front of you is not prepared, maybe he or she has a coat on and beneath that a sweater. Well, you can wear a sweater, but just there are people that just stand in line and they stand in line until the very last minute before they take off their coat and things like that. So if you're not prepared, yes, you will waste a lot of time for people behind you. I like to make sure that there are no liquids or any banned items in my carry-on baggage. So she makes sure that there aren't any illegal items in her carry-on baggage, meaning the bags or bag that she carries onto the plane. I like to wear shoes that are easy to take on and off. That's right, because sometimes they may ask you to take your shoes off. So if they do, you can just take your shoes off very easily. So I think that's a very good idea too. Okay, that is a wrap for today's actual story.
Going through airport security can be a huge pain in the neck. It can be very time-consuming and even very annoying, especially if you're stuck behind someone who's not very well prepared. When I go through airport security, I like to make sure that there are no liquids or any banned items in my carry-on baggage. I like to wear shoes that are easy to take on and off, and I wear a minimal amount of jewelry so that I don't set off any kind of metal detectors. I've never personally had any really big problems with airport security. When I first came to Korea from California, they did ask me to go through a full body scanner for some unknown reason. I wasn't really thrilled about it. I was a little upset and it was a little uncomfortable. I know a lot of people have had difficulties with the way they get treated at airport security. So while I don't always agree with their methods, overall I think it's better to be safe than sorry.
Today we talked about airport security, everyone. Hope you had a good time and learned lots as usual. So it is true, airport security is something that is needed. There are reasons why they become strict. Sometimes they may become lax, but I think it's like a cycle, okay? Kind of goes and it comes back. But the truth is, the fact is that although it may be inconvenient, it is an unavoidable part of modern travel, especially modern air travel, that is. Anyhow, next time let's talk about this topic. Customs inspection. What can we say or mention in a conversation about customs inspections? We'll talk about that next time. In the meantime, come to our homepage, everyone. Come on over to www.ebse.co.kr. Look for Actual English with Jennifer and share your thoughts on our message board. That's it for today. I'll catch you again next time. Bye for now.